All our friends and people online are not on yet, right? Oh, they are. Okay. Hi, everybody. Everybody. Oh, okay. Now we're all here. So today we're going to continue with our teaching on the Refuge Nundro. It's a preparation for our winter retreat and also for the winter retreat from afar. We're just in the third session, so it shouldn't be too hard to catch up, and I'll try to bring you all kind of forward, those who are here today, and the folks online. We're going to experiment with this as the format, that will start by doing the practice. And then we'll give the talk, and then we'll do the discussion at the end. So what I'll ask is that Venerable Lamsa will put up the visualization description online, on the screen here. Folks online have access to the PDF. I will lead it out loud. So if you're here and you can hear it and follow with that along, that's great. Or if you have your own copy and want to follow along on your computer, that's also fine. And if you get lost in the description because it's long, it's on the screen too. So there's many ways to access this visualization. A couple of things that I did not bring up before, but I noticed last time when we were doing the mantra recitation, a lot of people's lips weren't moving. Our direction is to actually have a little bit of breath coming across and our lips moving as we do the mantra. So it can be super, and should be super silent because you're in a room full of people, but just, but that your whole, body is engaged, and that, air is passing through the lips as you do the recitation. The other thing I didn't explain, which we'll get to, will be clearer for you all when we get there, but the practice goes like this. We'll do an extensive visualization of the refuge field, which we describe. Then we're going to go to our regular prayers in the blue prayer book. So people here have them memorized, but for you folks, turn to page 28, and I'll direct you when it's time to go there. It'll be clear. But go ahead and open to page 28. Folks online, you either have access to this or you can go to the Abbey program page and find the link for morning practices, and you can download the prayers there and open up to the prayers there. So anyway, we'll do the visualization, we will do the prayers, then we'll do the visualization and mantra recitation a little bit, and then we'll close. Okay, so that's the sequence by which we'll do things today. So the Refuge Nundro is one of those practices that is one of the preparatory practices that kind of purify our mind and generate a lot of merit. Essentially, it's to prepare us to be able to be qualified students, qualified to be able to practice Tantra, higher practices. But Venerable Children, whether that's our goal or not, Venerable Children, and I think other teachers as well, really rely on these as a way of purifying our mind and developing a lot of merit, and also deepening a foundation for our practice, especially if we're looking at refuge. Every time we walk into a Dharma center, we recite Refuge Buddha Dharma Sangha 3 times before we start. Almost here, we do it 3 times before many other things as well. And how often are we actually thinking about, well, what am I doing? What does that mean? What am I taking refuge in? Why am I taking refuge? What's the point? And in a way, if we don't have that present in our mind, then our Dharma practice itself, our study, our everything is somewhat academic, or maybe totally academic in some cases. So this Refuge Nundro is a really, really precious, for some of us laying the foundation, and for some of us fortifying, revisiting, enriching and deepening and broadening the foundation that we have for Dharma practice. So that's what we're going to do this morning. So as I said, we'll start with the practice, then we'll give the talk, and then we'll close with the discussion. Clear enough? Oh, I know the other thing I wanted to tell you. In the visualization, I have not described before this piece about the Lord of Death soaking up the negativities that pour out of the body during the practice. So if that doesn't jive with you, that's fine. You can just imagine that this light and, this filthy liquid that is pouring out of you, that is flushed out of you by the light and nectar that we visualize coming from the refuge field, vanishes into space. It can just evaporate when it hits the air and it's gone. But for those of you who get more into the, the symbolism of the graphic, the Lord of Death can be imagined as just any kind of big monster with a wide mouth. We have pictures of it around, but that is soaking up with delight all of our negativities so that we don't have to worry about polluting the planet. It's being consumed and transformed by this. So there's no Lord of Death. Don't get confused. There is no real Lord of Death, but an anthropomorphized figure is, for some of us, is good for our mind. For some of us, it's totally not. So that piece is optional. Okay. So let's start with just a few moments of silence. I'll set a motivation and then I'll lead the practice. I printed it in large type this time, so that should help. See. So take your mind to your breathing and allow everything to settle in your mind and in your body as well. Holding an upright spine, whether you're in the chair or on the floor. And focusing your attention on the breath with the intention of concentrating and settling the mind to prepare for this Dharma practice. A few days ago, Venerable Punsak gave a Bodhisattva breakfast corner talk, focusing on just one animal species that humans use for food, chickens. And that's really been on my mind these last few days. Looking at the fact that 74 billion chickens are grown and slaughtered for food on the planet every year. And just imagining the short life of those little chickens and how they are hatched. From the moment they're hatched, they're destined to be killed. Their average lifespan, I think, is 34 to 43 days. They are fattened up. Their beaks are cut. They're given food to make them super fat so they can't walk. They're jammed into cages, they hardly have any life, and it's always kind of constant terror because the sound of death is in the room all the time. So imagine what that would be like. That's 74 billion rebirths. Imagine waking up into that life. And brief though it is by human years, every bit of it a moment of suffering. Every one of those chickens has a wish to be happy. Every one of those chickens has been a human being. Every one of us has been a chicken. And whether we totally follow the idea of rebirth or not, imagine what that would be like. What seeds of Dharma that are in that chicken's mind could possibly ripen in a rebirth like that? Although I know, trying to think right now, someone told me that when they work with animals, they always chant mantra, which may have the fortune of ripening a seed in their mind. But how often do you think out of 74 billion does that happen? And of course, there's similar suffering even in the human realm. We don't even have to think we're a chicken in order to recall beings who are force-fed, who are forced labor, or beings who are starved, both directions. And see the suffering that comes simply through the state of their birth. And when we think of that, then our present situation becomes much more vividly precious. How right now we have a human body, we have a human mind, things work well enough. And we have had the wealth, the leisure to be able to indulge in spiritual practice beyond survival. We've met teachings that make sense to us. We've met the Buddha's teachings that describe the nature of reality. And we have this for a little while. Obviously, the humans in this room have lived more than 43 days. But we don't know how much longer we have ever. And that awareness that regardless of how long our life is, it inevitably ends in death, and we don't know when. And as ordinary beings, we also don't know what comes next. We do not have the capacity to control our rebirth yet. And so on that basis, we turn to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha as a refuge and a guide. To help us have some sense of support in moving forward in this life and the next one. To help us make the time we have meaningful. Meaningful in guiding us toward a fortunate rebirth, towards liberation, and even towards awakening. But we cannot move to that ultimate goal without thinking of all those chickens around us. Without cultivating a heart of compassion that's aware of the constant cycle of death, rebirth, and dukkha that people experience, beings experience, lifetime after lifetime. But right now we have the chance to make a very clear determination to overcome those causes that lead to that endless cycle for ourselves and to really do our best to develop a heart of compassion that's willing to take every single one of us with us, every single being. So even if you can only imagine 74 billion chickens, let your mind go as far as you can to recognize the suffering living beings and make a determination that today we'll use this practice, this session, all our service today and every day to help keep us on the path towards full awakening so that we can effectively, flawlessly lead all beings to liberation and enlightenment. So with that motivation, we turn your attention to the space in front, where we imagine in the midst of an ocean of Samantabhadra offerings, beautiful radiant offerings, in the middle of a spacious throne of precious gems. On this enormous throne in the center is a radiant jeweled throne. And on cushions of a variegated lotus, sun, and moon, our root spiritual mentor appears in the aspect of Shakyamuni Buddha. His body is of pure gold, radiant light, and he's adorned with a crown protrusion. The Buddha's left hand is in the gesture of meditation, and his right hand is in the earth-touching gesture. He sits in the Vajra posture, wearing the 3 brilliant saffron robes. Rays brighter than the sun radiate from his body in the 10 directions. Eyes never tire of his resplendent form with its perfect, vivid signs and marks. Ears never tire of his enchanting speech with its 60 melodies. His vast and profound mind is a treasure of knowledge and love whose depth is beyond measure. Free from all stains of imperfection, he is the consummation of all good qualities. The mere recollection of the Buddha dispels the anxieties of cyclic existence and self-complacent peace. He displays manifold, amazing powers like the 12 deeds to tame countless beings in countless worlds. So hold that image of the Buddha in your mind. And then on a throne to his right sits Maitreya, surrounded by the spiritual mentors of the lineage of extensive deeds. On his throne to the left sits Manjushri, and the spiritual mentors of the lineage of the profound view. In front of Buddha Shakyamuni is another small throne, and on that is my root spiritual mentor in the aspect of giving teachings. And that spiritual mentor is surrounded by all the spiritual mentors with whom I have a Dharma connection. They're all seated on cushions of lotus, sun, and moon. So hold these three smaller thrones in mind. Maitreya on the right, Buddha's right, Manjushri on the left, and our own root spiritual mentor and our own line of teachers directly in front of the Buddha looking at us. In the space behind Buddha Shakyamuni sits Vajradhara, victorious lord of myriad tantras, who is surrounded by the lineage spiritual mentors of the blessing of the practice. Then seated in big circles around these central thrones, sort of like being in a coliseum. First in the four directions are the retinue of Guhya Samaja, Sakra Sambhara, Vajrabharava, and Kalachakra. Around these is a big circle of all the other meditational deities. You might imagine those that you practice or those you're familiar with in that circle. Outside of them, also circling all the way around, is the whole rows of Buddhas, including the 35 confession Buddhas, all the medicine Buddhas, 1,000 Buddhas of this fortunate age. Imagine a whole circle of Buddhas. Surrounding the Buddhas is outside again on the Colosseum. There's a big circle of bodhisattvas. Around them, a tremendous row of hearer and solitary realizer arhats, all in meditative posture. Around them, a circle of dakas and dakinis. Around them, a circle of supramundane Dharma protectors. And then in the four directions, the mundane directional protectors. All in their respective seats. You can visualize that on either side of the lineage spiritual mentors of each of these lineages. Are splendid stands with the teachings of the Holy Dharma that are represented by brilliantly radiant texts. Thus, all of space is filled with objects of refuge, representations of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So have a sense of being in the presence of holy beings, realized beings, the sound of the Dharma pervading the universe. And then surrounding us are gathered all the beings of the 6 realms. Hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals of every type, humans, demigods, all the different kinds of devas. Whether higher rebirth or lower rebirth, overwhelmed by the various difficulties of dukkha, of samsara. So in the face of such constantly recurring problems, we seek protection and guidance from the spiritual mentors and the 3 jewels. And we take upon ourselves to lead this whole mass of ordinary beings around us in taking refuge. So then we turn to the text on page 28. Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I confess all my destructive actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until cyclic existence ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the Great Awakening. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strew Mount Meru, four-land sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. The objects of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, friends, enemies, and strangers, my body, wealth, and enjoyments, I offer these without any sense of loss. Please accept them with pleasure and inspire me and others to be free from the three poisonous attitudes. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. We go back to the text. So there is no request prayer here, but in your own mind, you can think about making request to the three jewels. And then turn your attention back to the visualization, the extensive field. And focus in first on that throne in the front of Shakyamuni Buddha, where your spiritual mentor is in the aspect of teaching, surrounded by all of your other teachers, and they're all looking at you with great love and kindness. So we recite Namo Gurubhya 108 times. I take refuge in the spiritual mentors is what that means. So as we recite this silently, imagine that the blessings and inspiration of the spiritual mentor's body, speech, and mind and enlightening influence flows from Shakyamuni Buddha and the spiritual mentors around him and those around you, around your own spiritual mentor, in the aspect of five-colored light and nectar. This light and nectar enters your body, your mind, and also those of all the beings around you. And as we recite and visualize all negativities created since beginningless time, particularly those of endangering the life of your spiritual mentors, disregarding their instructions, and so forth, all negativities committed in relation to the spiritual mentor, and all resulting sicknesses and harms leave your orifice and pores in the form of filthy liquid. They fall into the upturned mouth of the Lord of Death, or who's satisfied, or they completely evaporate into space. So as we recite this quietly, keep that visualization going of purifying and bringing blessings. Namo Gurubhyo, Namo Gurubhyo, Namo Gurubhyo, Namo And then we'll do the mantra a little while longer now with flowing light and nectar and white light flowing into you, purifying all negativities. Again, yellow light flowing into you, bringing inspiration. So now we'll do the yellow light part, bringing inspirations of their mind. Namo Guruvya. And we turn your attention to the Buddhas. Again, Shakyamuni Buddha in the center, and then the rows of meditational deities and all the Buddhas, all with the same realizations, all appearing in all these many, many forms to benefit sentient beings. Bring those Buddhas to mind. And once again, as we recite the mantra, Namo Buddhaya, imagine first that white light pours into you. We'll do this just a half mala each this time. White light pouring into you in the beginning to purify all the negativities that we've committed against the Buddhas. And then golden light coming, bringing the realizations of the Buddha's mind. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Buddhaya. Namo Buddhaya, now golden light, Namo Buddhaya, bringing realizations. Namo Buddhaya. We turn your attention to the forms of the texts on the stands near each spiritual mentor. So we take refuge in the Dharma with Namo Dharmaya. Also realizing that the texts are the representation and the real Dharma is the realizations in the minds of all of these holy beings. So again, we'll go half a mala, visualizing white light pouring from the texts themselves into you and all the beings around you, purifying all the negativities created wittingly and unwittingly with regard to the Dharma, particularly holding wrong views or abandoning the Dharma or criticizing the teachings and many other different ways that we can do this. So purifying Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya, Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya. Namo Dharmaya, now golden light, bringing the realization. Namo Dharmaya, and think that you and all others have come under the protection of the Dharma. And then we turn to the Sangha, Namo Sanghaya, taking refuge in the Sangha, taking your attention back to the visualization of all the beings around the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Arhats, Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma protectors. Beings who have progressed along the path and realized what the Buddha has taught enough to have understanding that, or purifying, recognizing directly the nature of reality and moving steadily towards their ultimate vehicles, attainment. Again, purifying first with white light. All negativities committed since beginningless time, particularly against misbehavior related to the Sangha, criticizing them, causing disunity, using Sangha property without permission, and so forth. Purifying all of these. Namo Sanghaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Sanghaya. Namo Sanghaya, and then the realizations coming from them as well. Golden light pouring in. Namo Sanghaya. Namo Sanghaya. And really have a sense that you and all beings have come under the protection of the Sangha. And then we'll do one mala recitation of all four. Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Nama Sanghaya. Light and nectar pouring from them and all of the negativities pouring out of you. Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Dharmaya, Sanghaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Dharmaya, Sanghaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. So sit with a moment with a sense of having returned to the three jewels of refuge very deeply from your heart. And appreciate the relationship that you have with each object of refuge. And then all the objects of refuge begin to dissolve into light from the outside in, absorbing one row into the next, into the central figure of Shakyamuni Buddha. And then Shakyamuni Buddha emanates countless replicas of himself that come to the crown of your head and the heads of all the beings around you, placing the same direction as you. The Buddha dissolves into light and absorbs down right through your central channel into your heart. Your body and mind become very pure and clear and bright, inseparable from the Buddha's holy body, speech, and mind. Likewise, all the Buddhas on the heads of all the beings dissolve into light and absorb into them, absorbing into their hearts. And the Buddha reappears at your heart, Now we dedicate the merit of the practice. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Is it starting to feel a little more familiar? It's a really beautiful practice, isn't it? For some people, yes, some not so. Ho-hum. Okay. Any questions about this order? I think this structure is the one that we will use. We won't spend so much time doing the practice in the future, but I think the structure gives us some familiarity and some basis. And then there's a lot of flexibility within that we'll talk about as the weeks go by. Yeah.
So what I gather from comparing like last week to this week is that there are two different places that we could do the mantra recitation. One is when we're going through the practice on page 28, we can do it when we first do Namo Guruvaya and pause there to do our longer, or we can go through the whole practice and then do the longer at the end where we'd normally do like a Lamra meditation.
Yeah. It's not the Lamra meditation, it's the visuals. It's where you normally do the visualization for any other deity practice. After you've taken refuge, after you've done brought to mind the 4 immeasurables, after you've done your 7-limb prayer, so this is, in any of our sadhanas, this is where we would do the mantra recitation. Mm-hmm. Right?
Okay, yeah. Amoni Muni Mahamuni. Okay, so
or Omane Peme Hung, or whatever sadhana you're doing, that's where it comes.
Okay, so we're kind of replacing Shakyamuni Buddha's mantra with this mantra recitation.
Yeah. Because, and here's why I made the decision, and there's lots of ways to do this. That's one of the reasons that I'm setting it like this, is because there are many different ways to do it. And if we go with all the different ways to do it, we will all be confused. So we'll set this one, and then we'll talk about the variations as the weeks go by. But our instruction, Lamrim right here, says that we begin our sessions by doing these very things. We take refuge. We do the 7 limbs. We do our mandala offering. So if we do this as our first practice every morning, we're fulfilling that foundational opening that gives us the chance to do these preparatory practices as a part of the sadhana. Then if you're doing 5 sessions in the day, or however many we're doing, you've done that. So you may want to spend much more time just doing the mantra session after session. But this is the structure I think that we're all familiar with. We all know the Buddha's practice very well. So we insert this in there, and that gives us the foundation and the structure for how we do it. Yeah. Yes, Tenzin.
The Arya Sangha, is it Daka Dakinis, is it considered as part of the Arya Sangha?
I think so, because they are Aryas. Is that true, Venerable Supple? Do you know? Yeah, they're Arya Sanghas. Yeah, they're part of the Arya Sangha. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to where we left off last week. I was reviewing some of Venerable SK's talks on this stuff, on the refuge, on refuge. And she said a statement which is absolutely true, but it really stopped me. She said, refuge is a state of mind. Now you think, of course, you know that, but to actually hear it stated that way was very helpful. It's not something you just do and say with your mouth. It's not something you just do even with your body. It is a state of mind. Now, it's not in a list of middle factors that we study, but I bet if we went into that long Abhidharma list that she went into, we might find it. Venerable Chögyam says, Going for refuge is to come under the protection of something, to rely completely on something, to entrust oneself fully to something. For Buddhist practitioners, refuge is the means by which we train our minds to cease from performing negative activities, to start performing beneficial activities, to focus on whatever object we wish to focus on, and to see reality the way it truly exists. 4 things here in that state of mind. We train our minds to cease from performing negative actions, to perform beneficial actions, to focus on whatever object we're focusing on, and to see the reality the way it exists. Now, we set those motivations every morning. Harm no living being, to do my best to be of benefit, to generate bodhicitta, and now we're also bringing emptiness into that thought. Without refuge as a foundation, all our other practices are mere mental exercises that will have little benefit in the ultimate sense, she says. So knowing what we're taking refuge in is really, and why, is the foundation of this whole thing. So, and last week we started talking about the causes for taking refuge, and we're going to go a little bit further with that today. So refuge, the state of mind of refuge has 2 causes. And last week we talked about the first cause using the word fear. I think is the only word I used last week. Other words are alarm or apprehension or concern. It's the awareness of the dangers of cyclic existence, being aware of the situation that we're in, of being subject or being propelled by our own afflictions and karma, taking on body after body after body without any choice, or a capacity to direct where we're reborn, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, and that in every situation, no matter what we're experiencing, whether it's the really gross, manifest, painful dukkha, or whether it's the dukkha of change, where we do have happiness, we do have pleasure. It's not denying that in any way, and it goes just like that. We can't hang on to it. Try as we do. It's part of our dilemma. We get a moment of it, and we just want it to stay so bad, and it doesn't. And then on top of that, beneath all of that, that very, very kind of subtle, constant truth that we are have this pervasive conditioning of being controlled by our karma and afflictions, or afflictions and the karma that come from that. And so that the analogy they use is that we're always walking on the precipice, that no matter how much happiness we try to squeak out of our existence, we're right on the edge of a cliff all the time, and we can fall over like that. This reminds me of a friend of mine, actually, who had moved to Arizona because her partner was working with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to develop, to really train in helping people with their dying process. And they were hiking on Mount Lemmon outside of Tucson during a period when there were big flash floods, and a flash flood had swept through that particular ridge they were walking on, which I guess they didn't know. And her partner took a step and fell into the river below. Her partner, the death expert, into the river below. And Patty just watched this most important person in her life head right down the river and over the cliff, and that was the end of it. She died. It's like that. Healthy, strong. The path gave way. Boom. Gone. We never know. We never know. And it's not to scare us. It's to make us stay awake, because that's the fact of the matter. We don't ever know. So in taking refuge, it is said, if we can cultivate the mind that takes refuge at the time of death, then for sure we will not be born in the lower realm. That's a very good motivation to practice for, I think. Anyway, so fear or alarm about the dangers of cyclic existence. And last week we talked about how much we actually think about our possibility of being reborn in lower realms. I hear people have been thinking about that a little bit, and it's good to keep thinking about it. It is good to keep thinking about it. And it's also true, as we said in the discussion, that a lot of people are very aware of the kind of day-to-day suffering, and that's another good reason for taking refuge. So there's 3 levels of this first motivation for taking refuge, this fear or concern. It's a wise fear. There's a difference between being hysterical and panicked and kind of off-the-wall crazy fear, and a wisdom fear that knows that we should not be walking down the center lane of the freeway. That's one wise thing to know. You would be afraid to walk down the center lane of the freeway. I would be afraid. Maybe not everyone is. Personally, I'm afraid to jump out of an airplane, but other people are not necessarily. But, a wisdom fear is different than a crazy fear, right? But there's 3 levels of this, quote, fear. And here, fear really means the wish to avoid suffering. That's what it's really pointing to when they talk about the reason for using fear as a motivation for taking refuge. So there's 3 levels of how this works is also according to the 3 scopes, individuals of 3 different scopes. So the first one is fear of lower realms, or for taking rebirth in an unfortunate situation or next life. That's the lowest scope, because the motivation of the first scope being is to get a good rebirth. Now, if we are practicing without that basic motivation, our practice is really this life's practice. And technically speaking, it's not even Dharma practice. It becomes Dharma practice when we are aware of that wish to do our practice, to follow the Buddha's teachings with a wish to be sure that we attain a fortunate rebirth. So that's something to actually hold in our minds, to really be aware and check. When I sit down to practice and I set my motivation, is that in my mind? Am I aware? Do I have that awareness in my mind? That's helpful. So think about human situations that are hell-like, or hungry ghost-like, or animal-like. I mean, you don't have to think about lower realms to think about how much suffering there is. And that can motivate us to have a fortunate rebirth. A human rebirth, upper realm, a God realm rebirth, and especially for practitioners, a rebirth where we have the capacity or the ability to practice the Dharma again. We're going for a precious human life, not just any old human life. Then the middle scope motivation is to look at the 3 types of dukkha and understand that it's not just about pain, and to realize that cyclic existence is totally undesirable no matter where you're reborn, and we set the motivation to exit. We set the motivation to be able to be liberated completely from cyclic existence, to attain nirvana. And then the great scope motivation, of course, is the Bodhisattva's path. And that's the one where we cultivate, really train to look around and say, I'm not the only one. Every single one has the same level of suffering, and I don't want any of them to suffer. And I will do what it takes, whatever it takes, however long it takes, to take everybody with me. And that's the great scope motivation, which we are just drilled into us over and over and over from the beginning, which is important. Very, very important. And it's so helpful to keep remembering that this is on the basis of the other 2. It's not just that we want to be Buddhists. We have to think about why we want to be Buddhists. We want to be Buddhists to benefit others. What's the benefiting of others? It's actually recognizing the situation of samsara and wishing all of us to be free. So that's our motivation for taking refuge, the first one. And then the second cause for taking refuge is confidence or faith in the three jewels to be able to guide us. So, okay, it's a mess. This is not a good situation. I can eke some happiness out of this, but ideally I keep trying and trying and trying, and clearly it hasn't worked. And something about these teachings register, or I wouldn't be sitting in this room. So developing faith and confidence that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha could actually lead us out of samsara to fulfill these three levels of wishes, to have a good rebirth, to be liberated, or to become fully awakened. So there's these wonderful verses in chapter 2 of Shantideva. I think Lama Tsongkhapa quotes them liberally, where he says, "What need to mention the tremendous despair when stricken with disease of great panic, being clasped by the physical forms of the frightful messengers of death? Who can afford me real protection from this great horror? With terrified, bulging eyes agape, I shall search the four quarters for refuge. But seeing no refuge there, I shall become enveloped in gloom. If there should be no protection there, then what shall I be able to do? Therefore, I now seek refuge in the Buddhas who protect the world, who strive to shelter all that lives, and with great strength eradicates all fears. Likewise, I purely seek refuge in the Dharma they have realized that clears away the fears of cyclic existence, and in the assembly of bodhisattvas." So he says it super clearly, right? With the first cause, fear, we realize we're in a dangerous situation. We need help. And then we look around and see who can give us help and what that help might look like. So that's when we turn to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. If we have confidence that the three jewels can give us that help, then that's where our faith arises. Now, faith, as we talked about last week, is sometimes a funny word. For me, it works. I have my own set of religious baggage, of course, but for somehow faith really works for me. But for some people, it's like just this blind faith feeling of I have to surrender, and it has a heavy connotation. So maybe more confidence is better. Confidence in the three jewels. Confidence for me doesn't have the same emotional weight. That's where I go with it. But it's up to you. Regardless of what you call it, faith or confidence is a virtuous mental factor. It's one of the 11 virtuous mental factors that we learn about. And it's the foundation or support for aspiration. So it's a powerful mental factor to cultivate. If our faith is in a virtuous object, that's what we have to be careful of, to make sure that it is. It's healthy, it's positive, and there are different objects of faith. So we can have faith in the aspiration to achieve calm abiding, or we can have faith or confidence in the law of karma, which we want to cultivate. But here we're talking specifically about faith or confidence in the three jewels to guide us. So it's very precise here. Faith in the three jewels. And the Lamrim teaches us here that the way to generate faith in the three jewels, that these three objects of refuge, is to learn their qualities and contemplate their qualities so that we really get to know them. And that's when Venerable says this practice is to help us develop a relationship with Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's what she's talking about. That we spend this time that we're reciting the mantra, oh no, and our mind isn't off, down the road at Starbucks, but that we're really thinking about the qualities of these beings whose names we are reciting again and again and again, and why they're important. So over the next few weeks, we're not going to do that so much today, but over the next few weeks, then we're going to start looking at some of the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in detail. And also, we'll be looking at some of the negative actions that we do in relationship to them, often just by negligence, not even with a negative mind, but with a mind that's not paying attention. But I want to go a little bit further into this faith thing today. So very generally, when we talk about the three jewels of refuge, the Buddhas are the ones, as we know, have completely abandoned all afflictive middle states, their seeds, their stains. They've eliminated all karmas. They've attained the omniscient mind of enlightenment. That is an awesome attainment. And what is it that we need to learn? That's what we need to understand. What does that mean? They've eliminated all these things. They've abandoned these things. They've cultivated these good qualities. What does that actually mean? How do I understand that? That's what we do with this practice. The Dharma is the realizations and the teachings that lead to those realizations and to liberation. These are very general, okay? The Sangha, in the strictest sense, are those who have actualized these teachings and have realized the wisdom, realizing emptiness directly. And then, in a conventional sense, the Sangha is represented by 4 or more fully ordained monastics. Not one, not just any one, 4 or more fully ordained monastics doing the prescribed activities, as I understand it, so that they're at least practicing in the way that the Buddha gave for the Sangha to practice. And it takes 4 to do that. So the more I look at this practice, the more I realize how much this Refuge Nundro's job is to, for us, if we're doing this Nundro, is to really deepen and understand every single aspect of this refuge. And once that's done, then we're practicing from a different kind of place, really. And as you know, I said on the first day, and I will say many, many times, refuge is not static. It's not like you take refuge, you take 5 precepts as a layperson, you take the refuge, and then that's it for the rest of your life. The more you learn, the more you understand, the more deeply your refuge grows, the wider your refuge grows. And at different times, we do this very practice ourselves. People here have done it several times. It's different every time because you're in a different place with the Dharma. But when we think about it as a state of mind, a state of mind whose capacity is to hold the Buddhist worldview and to behave based on that understanding, then it gets really much more powerful. Yeah. So I want to cover the 3 different kinds of faith that I just brushed on first time I think we talked. It's useful to know these 2. I've seen them in different orders depending on which book I'm studying, so I don't know if there is an official order. Maybe there isn't, but this is the way Venerable most often lays them out. It's not the way she does it every time. But the first one is called admiring or clear faith, lucid faith, or we call it admiring faith. It's the kind of confidence that comes from hearing about the qualities and thinking, oh, I think that's really great. Buddhas, wow, they sound really wonderful. Or hearing about the Dalai Lama, wow, he sounds like an amazing being. That's an admiring faith. Our spiritual mentors, we can have admiring faith in. We can have it in all kinds of ways of recognizing good qualities and being happy and joyful about those good qualities. So that gets us going. Maybe that's why it comes first so often, because that's really the front door sometimes. You think, wow, who was I just? Oh, Venerable Tarpa talking about meeting the Chinese nuns who came here. Like, whoa, I see this Sangha of 4 really powerful, ordained women behaving like monastics, and I admire that. Well, it got her into robes, but it started with the admiring faith, right? The admiration for what she was seeing and experiencing. The second kind of faith is the wishing or aspiring faith, which goes beyond rejoicing in the good qualities and actually thinking, oh, I want to be like that. I'd like to attain that. In terms of the Dalai Lama, I'd like to be like him. Yeah? I don't have the presumption that I could be, but that's my own problem. In terms of admiring and wishing and aspiring, I can both admire and then aspire to really follow in his footsteps, to follow in the footsteps of our teacher, Venerable Chödrön. Aspiring to become like that. And using that same faith, aspiring to become like the Buddha. And then the third kind is this faith of conviction, and this is the most stable kind. So these first two are not so stable. You can have admiring faith for somebody, and then somebody starts telling you stories about what's really going in their life, and you're, forget it. I used to admire them, but now that I've heard this rumor, forget it. And even aspiring faith, if we start to lose confidence in, what we thought we saw, what was a pure projection, then, that can go too. But once we've done our due diligence, pardon the term, and really examined not just the being, but actually go through an analysis and investigation of what is this object? How do I understand it? What proof do I have that it is reliable? How do I prove that to myself? How do I prove that on myself? And that's our job. I remember there was a time when I went through quite an angry period as not a brand new Dharma student, but somewhere in there, where I wanted proof, and I wanted the teacher to prove it. Mostly I wanted proof that there was something, if I gave up my attachment to sense pleasure, that there was something better. I want to prove it. Prove this to me, because I don't get it. And it's not the teacher's job to prove it. It's not even the Buddha's job to prove it. It's our job. When we have our doubts and our questions as Dharma students, it's our job to do the proving about what is. And it's all laid out here. Details, lists, all the reasons that the Buddha Dharma Sangha is reliable refuge here. Dignaga lays it out, Dharmakirti lays it out, all these commentators try to tell us in detail what they said. Our job is to study those, learn those, and develop our own faith of conviction. And once that faith of conviction is established, it is unshakable. It does not matter what if you deepen that conviction on and on and on, that's the stable basis, because it's done through reasoning. It's done through our own understanding. So if we talk about the Buddha, for example, there's 4 qualities that often come up. I really like the way you say it here. No, not here, here. You've all heard them. That first of all, the Buddha is free of all fears. The Buddha has skillful means to free others from all fears. The Buddha has compassion for every living being. No, I don't have it here. And the Buddha works for every living being, whether they believe in the Buddha or not, whether they help the Buddha or not. Those are like the 4 entry-level focus on the Buddha qualities. I always wondered, so what? He's free from fear. Why is that such a big deal? Well, that was a very shallow mind. That was a very shallow mind. Freedom from all fear. The Buddha has eliminated all appearances of all false appearances, for one thing. So there's nothing to be afraid of. Furthermore, the Buddha's mind has completely eliminated all the afflictions that arise and all the conceptual even thoughts. Of course, there's no fear. The Buddha acts without any doubt, any hesitation, without a thought, actually, spontaneously acting to benefit living beings. Having the skill to eliminate that fear for all beings, that means lead us on the path to the same realizations, without any bias towards any being. It's completely freely available to every single one. And there is no discrimination about who receives it. None. So those qualities alone, free of all fear, relieving all beings of fear, acting with complete compassion for every being, without any bias or discrimination against any being. Who else has that? I mean, who else do we admire? Taylor Swift. I don't know. Maybe she does. Joe Biden. I mean, Donald Trump. I mean, whoever people are admiring. Really? Freedom from all fear. Able to free other beings from fear, all beings from fear. Compassion for every being. No discrimination between them. So that's a start on the Buddhas. So next week we'll go into greater detail. Dharma and the Sangha have a shorter list. The Buddhas have pages and pages and pages. Dharma refers to two things, the realizations of the path. So it's interesting to think about, how do I take refuge in the realizations of the mind of another being? Think about that. It's the cessations of all sufferings and their causes brought about by those realizations as well. And that's our real protection. And then in a general sense, of course, the Dharma refers to those teachings of the Buddha that take us there. And then the Sangha are those who have realized emptiness directly, as I said before. So in our circle, all the Bodhisattvas, all the Arhats, all the Dakas and Dakinis. Okay, any questions? I know this is a review for most people, but it's, I think, important to understand the platform we're standing on. Okay, then let's do just a short discussion group time. Here's this week's question. From what you already know of the excellent qualities of the three jewels, what makes them a worthy object of refuge for you? So take a moment to just sit back and think about that. From what you know of the three jewels, what makes them trustworthy objects of refuge for you? So for folks online, we're going to end here. You all think about this and dedicate after you've thought about it. Here, we'll just break up into pairs and do a little sharing and answer that question with each other, and then we'll come back in about 7 minutes and debrief and dedicate. Okay.